everybody, Pepper here, and I'm so excited to get to read to you a little bit from one of my books. I thought since about anybody could do a regular standard American accent, that I would choose a book that had a very unique, specific accent. So I am going to be reading to you from My Heart Belongs in the Blue Ridge that came out with Barber in January 2019. And I am so excited to get to give you some Appalachian flair. So here we go. September 1918. He's bringing nothing but trouble, Caroline McAdams. Make no bones about it. Imogene Carter's voice clapped like thunder into Laurel's solitude and sent her scuttling deeper into the recesses of the barn's loft. She tucked her precious novel within the folds of her skirt and peered around the mound of straw blocking her from the unwelcome visitors below. Her deep sigh fanned the loose straw nearby. All Laurel wanted was a few minutes of peace and quiet from a day full of chores to disappear into the pages of a good book. What was the use of being a grown woman if you couldn't even hide long enough to read one chapter? She held her breath. Maybe the women would go away and kindly leave her be. No such luck. The barn door groaned with their entrance, almost as though it hated hearing Imogene's complaints as much as Laurel and half of the mountain did. One quick peek around the straw mound showed 3 heads. Long and lean Imogene, round and rosy Pearl Jacobs, and Mama, sweet as honeysuckle and strong as pine. You know I don't want to gossip about nobody, Caroline. Laurel rolled her eyes to the ceiling and prayed God wouldn't strike Imogene down on the spot. That woman could stretch the truth from here to the horizon and back again. Laurel gave up hope for a peace and quiet. I got a bad feeling about this missionary teacher. Imogene's voice bounced off the rafters. Something's wrong with him. He's come all the way across the ocean, London or some city like that, and you know what kind of folks comes from them places. Rascals, Caroline, rotten to the core. Him? The new teacher was a him? Laurel scooted closer to the edge of the loft. Why on earth was a foreign teacher coming to Maple Springs, and a man besides? Sure enough, they'd gotten used to the ways of Reverend Anderson from England, but it had taken 2 years at least, and he was doing heaven's work. So he was supposed to stretch God's net to the ends of the earth. And for an Englishman, Maple Springs probably looked a whole lot like it teetered on the very edge. Now, Jean, we can't go jumping to conclusions about Mr. Taylor, Mama responded with her usual calm. Laurel couldn't help but smile. I heard tell he has connections with Reverend Anderson, and you know what good work he's done for folks in these parts. Besides, it don't make sense, a young man coming all the way here just to lead our young'uns astray. Ain't that the truth, Caroline? Imogene's voice edged a pitch higher, like an off note on the fiddle. Why would such a man spend his idle time in Maple Springs instead of fighting the war like every other man within fighting age? No, sirree, I got a bad feeling about this, and make no mistake. Wouldn't be surprised none if he was running from the law. Laurel shook her head at the notion, but Imogene's mention of the war shot a chill over Laurel's skin. Jeb was over there, somewhere. She'd heard horrible accounts from her great-granddaddy about the war betwixt the states, but what did war look like in a whole different country? Worse, she'd wager. Let's not go making our minds up about the boy before we even lay eyes on him. I reckon he's going to get a shock moving from a city nohow, so we ought to try and make things easy on him. Mama's reasonable request smoothed like sugar on butter. There ain't nothing good come from the city. Nothing. Imogene bellowed on, her voice as harsh as Mama's was easygoing. He even looks like trouble. Pearl saw him last evening, didn't you, Pearl? Coming up a stretch from the train depot. Came right down into Miss Cappy's store, Pearl replied. Fanciest get-up I ever did see, and a face as smooth as his voice, she sniffed. Smelled like the city. You mean he smelled like sin? Imogene preached louder, causing the cow to scuttle, drawing you in and sickening your soul. That's what he's going to do, Caroline. You just wait and see. What we need to do is thank God for answered prayer. Mama's words stopped the conversation dead. I couldn't agree more, Jean. We've been praying for a new school teacher all summer long. School's already starting 2 weeks late for lack of one. At least one woman in that gaggle talks sense. And I reckon, being from the city, he's going dressed different than the likes of us. We need to learn about the world outside of here. How many of our boys right now are plumb across the ocean fighting this war, and anything we can't get or make back in our mountain, the good Lord ain't meant for us to have? Laurel balled up a fistful of skirt and almost threw her book from the loft just to see if it would knock a clear thought into Imogene's mule head. But there was no use in wasting a good throw or a good book. Of all the narrow-minded things to conjure up, Imogen Carter ruled the mountain. And if somebody didn't take a mind to help that new teacher, Imogen would have the whole hill and hollow convinced he was a no-account peddler of sin. Jean, Pearl, I reckon my rooster crowing last night. I heard him. And would you just look at that sky? Mama tisked. Sure enough, that old rooster must have been right. Looks like rain. Laurel glanced through the loft's window at the afternoon sky. A few clouds passed over the sun, but nothing serious. Sure as shooting, her mama had a plan. Honey-coated clever. Y'all might want to get on home before the rain starts. Ain't you wearing that new store-bought sweater of yourn, Jean? Laurel caught her snicker in her palm. Someday she'd like to be as a genius as her mama. Well now, if that rooster of yourn crowed, no need to chance it. Imogen hesitated, and Laurel could almost see the woman tugging at the ends of her sweater. Sounds of shuffling feet moved toward the barn door. We'll see you in church then. If Sam don't have other plans for me, I'll be there. That husband of yourn needs to get into church, Caroline. Him and his work ain't gonna save his soul. Laurel nearly stood to her mama's defense, as if the whole house hadn't been praying for her daddy for years, Mama the fiercest of them all. But I reckon that's talk for another day. Imogen's voice conceded, and Laurel relaxed back into the straw. Have a good night, you hear? The women's muffled goodbyes disappeared behind the closed barn door, and welcome silence returned. Laurel sighed and opened the novel, searching for her spot in Little Women. Joe had just met Laurie. No doubt romance would follow betwixt the two of them, and then, well, most likely, Joe would change. Dreams would change. She grimaced down at the page, her thoughts flitting to her sister Kizzy and a whole host of other girls she'd once known. Romance sure had a way of messing up dreams. Laurel's attention darted to the far corner of the barn where her precious stash of savings hid at the base of the post. 6 more months working for Miss Cappy was all it would take for Laurel to have enough room and board cash for college. A dream she'd never considered before her teacher last year planted the seed. Miss Brayton talked of possibilities, of sending out mountain folks to bring learning back to the hollows, and there wasn't no romance on the planet going to stop her. She'd turned down 2 marriage proposals in the last year to hang on to this new dream, a hope swelling bigger in her chest than the whole eastern side of the mountain. Her attention flipped back to the closed barn door. Wonder what the city teacher knew about college. Maybe he even got a 2-year degree. She hugged her book and fell back into the scratchy straw, eyes closing to daydream. A 2-year degree in a real college? Imagine the books. Come on down, girl. Laurel shot up to a sitting position and snapped her book closed. She stifled a groan, scooted to the edge of the loft, and peered over. How'd you know I was up here? I'm your mama. I've known you better than anybody else for 19 years. Mama placed her hands on her hips, but the hint of a smile played on her pressed lips. I got a job for you to do. Laurel tucked her book beneath her arm and shimmied down the loft ladder. What other job could Mama possibly have for her? She'd finished all of her morning chores well before breakfast and helped clean up after lunch hours ago. You need to get down to that mission house and invite the new teacher for supper. Laurel almost missed the last ladder rung. She turned so fast. What? Mama clicked her tongue. Ain't no telling what welcome he'll get with the ladies like them on the lookout. Besides, if we show a little kindness from the start, other folks will follow. Laurel didn't argue, but cast another look up the ladder and then back at her book. Mama's hand warmed her shoulder. I know you work real hard, and if Jeb was here, I'd send him. At the thought of her brother fighting in some faraway place with machine guns and cannons and heaven knew what else, Laurel pushed her disappointment away. I don't mind none, Mama. Preacher Anderson's plumb over the mountain in Yellow Hill on a call, so I reckon he missed picking up the teacher at the train depot. You mean the new teacher walked from the station to Maple Springs on his own? That's 5 miles if it's one, which says a lot about his strength of character. Determined, or crazy, but city folk were a sight bit different than country folk. And I reckon he slept in the mission house last night. Laurel's mouth slipped open. Surely not, Mama. It ain't fit for a family of coons. Which is why you're going to invite him to stay here while the menfolk make the mission house fit for a school teacher. Laurel stopped dusting off her skirt and stared at her mama. Stay here. Heat drained from her face and left a trail of cold down her neck. The back room of the barn had been home to many a stranger, but not this late in the year. It's been about 6 months, Mama. High time for Daddy to... Your daddy's fine for a while yet. It's the dark days that cause his dark mood. Her mama looked out the barn window, a sliver of sunlight haloing her sky-blue eyes. We'll see the signs beforehand. She turned back to Laurel and shooed her toward the door. Go on now. It's going to be evening before long. Laurel hesitated only a second longer before she headed out the door and down the steep mountain path toward the church schoolhouse. The trees were only beginning to shift into autumn colors, with hickory and beech displaying their golden glints first. She breathed in the earth's fragrance, still fresh from morning rain. The scent mingled with the faintest hint of wild rose and moss, faithful companions through the dense woods. Sunlight created a patchwork against the leafy trail as it slit through the mature trees and led the way down the mountain. Small glimpses of horizon showed between the trees and offered an endless view to uncharted lands of colleges and city streets and millions of other things she'd only seen through the pages of books. What did Mama call the new teacher? Mr. Taylor. Well, if he was anything like Mr. Brickner from 5 years ago, bald with a voice as perpetually vacant as his expression, Laurel might have to pinch herself during supper to keep awake. Besides, with 8 different teachers in as many years, only 2 stood out from among the others. 2 who didn't enter Maple Springs on a rescue mission to save the backwoods heathen mountaineers from their ungodly and sinful ways. They came to truly teach and learn. Miss Schoondike from 3 years ago stirred the spark of Laurel's curiosity about college with her personal stories of massive libraries and engaging lectures. But Miss Brayton, 2 years later, fanned the flicker to flame. The young raven-headed woman saw potential in all her students, but recognized Maple Springs' need for a consistent teacher, particularly a native with the courage to get a college degree and bring learning back to her people. And Laurel planned on being that teacher.